Well, good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Um, Welcome to FAIR's International Immigration Podcast. And our guest today will be Mr. Rodrigo Ballester. He is a Spanish law graduate who grew up in France, lived in Belgium, and is currently established in Budapest, Hungary, where he heads the Center for European Affairs at the Mathias Corvinus Collegium. Prior to this, he worked in the European Union for 16 years, both in the European Commission, where he worked for 13 years, and in the European Parliament after graduating from the EU's top of EU Affairs School, the College of Europe. He notably spent 3 years in the European Service in charge of migration, dealing with sub-Saharan Africa and Morocco. He frequently publishes in the press and appears on radio and TV in Spain, France, Brussels, and Hungary. And he is also married and has 3 children. Well, Mr. Ballester, welcome to the program. We're very happy to have you.
Many thanks. Many thanks for the invitation. I'm very happy to.
Thank you so much. So, mass migration, especially illegal migration, is a major crisis on both sides of the Atlantic now, both in America and in Europe. When it comes to Spain, what are some of the key problems with mass migration as far as things like culture, crime, and the economy are concerned?
In Spain, the situation is, I would say, a little better than in other countries of Western Europe for a simple reason. We have a lot of migration, but most of this migration so far comes from Latin American countries. Peru, Colombia, now a lot of Venezuela as well, Ecuador. And that makes the integration of those persons easier because for obvious reasons, common language, common culture, common past, to a certain extent, a common religion. This being said, you also have to know that the single country, the most important country of origin for migration in Spain is Morocco. Bear in mind that Spain is the top south of Europe. And Spain is 14 kilometers, so basically 10 miles away from Africa. On a good day, when it's cleared, when it's not cloudy, from Spain, you see Africa. You literally see Africa. And the first country, of course, is Morocco. And so in Spain also, you have more and more migration from Morocco and from sub-Saharan Africa, Black Africa, so to speak. And I would say that the phenomenon in Spain of ghettoization, the way you can find it in France, for example, is not so pronounced. But this being said, you start having important cultural clashes actually in Spain. And last year, for the first time, you had riots. You have riots triggered by the behavior of illegal migrants that were beating old people in the southeast of Spain, in Murcia, the region of Murcia, concretely in a city called Torre Pacheco. And for the first time in Spain, we had migration riots. So it is starting. And also we have, like in France to a lesser extent, but still we have a problem of entrism, what we call entrism, so of entrism of radical Islam, of political Islam that is becoming very vocal, very extroverted, and is trying to change the local rules to their own benefit. Those are, I would say, the main problems we have. Don't forget the housing crisis, also like the consequences on the social system. We have so many migrants in Spain that it's becoming now a problem for young people to find affordable housing. And we have more and more like waiting lines in the social security system. Before, like 10 years ago, Spain had a great system of health. It was basically, it covered everything. And now in the last years, we start having like big waiting times. That's also due to a certain extent to the weight of migration.
Now, I understand that Spain's socialist prime minister, Pedro Sanchez, he's trying to push through an amnesty for these illegal migrants. Now, I mean, might be 500,000, 800,000, or all kinds of different estimates. Can you explain how this amnesty is working? Because how it's going through the parliament or being pushed through royal decree? What is this going to do to Spain?
A lot of harm. just to answer your question very quickly, let me give you a bit the context. The Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, has a very weak parliamentary coalition in Spain. So much so that he has been unable to adopt a budget in the last 4 years. So today in Spain, in 2026, the country is still working with the budget of 2022. Can you imagine? So it means that he's ruling without having a majority. And so he has enough members of the parliament to survive, maybe law by law, but it's a very heterogeneous coalition. You have to understand that now basically Pedro Sanchez is running the country with all the enemies of the country. I'm speaking about the extreme left, like openly communist parties, and also independentists, so countries that want Spain to disappear and to be blown into pieces. Notably, Catalan independentists, but also the Basque country independentists, including the former terrorists. This is the coalition that is now in power. And so, of course, in order for him to stay in power, he needs to please them one by one. So if the Basque separatists or the Catalan separatists want, for example, to stop paying taxes, basically, he will say yes. And if the communists or the extreme left, I mean, you have two parties, that's why I make the difference. So, for example, a party called Podemos, which is, I would say, the closest thing you have in the US to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they represent like 2-3% of the voters, but they are indispensable for the coalition. And those were the ones asking for this massive regularization. And so Sanchez said yes. He said yes because he needs to survive, and basically his only aim in life is to stay as long as he can in power. He has no sense of national interest whatsoever. He's very psychopathic in that extent. And so it has been agreed that 500,000 migrants will be regularized. The problem is that he doesn't have a strong majority for that, so he will do it. He did it actually through a royal decree. A royal decree is the legal form we have in Spain that is totally distorted because it's only used in case of urgency, except that Pedro Sanchez used it like hundreds of times, literally hundreds of times. It must be after that approved by the parliament once it has been adopted. And also you need to know that the Supreme Court of Spain will decide in the coming weeks whether this regularization is legal or not, because some people filed an appeal, based on grounds of urgency or something like that. So asking for preliminary measures. What is very shocking is that this regularization doesn't have like the consensus of the Spanish parliament for sure, but also that the criteria are extremely lousy. The only thing you need to show is that you lived in Hungary in Spain, for a couple of months before the 31st of December 2025, and you didn't have criminal records. But for example, how can somebody, a migrant from Pakistan, proved and ask for a criminal record from Pakistan? It's almost impossible. So the Spanish government is being extremely laxist and tolerant with that. So basically, we are regularizing at least 500,000 people, whether, with very few clear and solid evidences that they don't have criminal records. The figures are also important because officially we say 500,000, but actually it's rather 800,000. And 800,000, and this is important, without considering family reunification. And so those migrants, in their huge majority young men can bring, once they have the papers, they can bring wives, children, and sometimes even parents or parents-in-law. So some police organizations rather speak about 2 million. In fine, it could be up to 2 million people in a country of 49 million people with already like a historically low demographic, so natality birth rate, but that keeps growing and growing because of migration. And we could add to this, very dangerous social cocktail up to 2 million migrants that suddenly will, get like a residence permit, not the citizenship, but a residence permit.
Yeah. So, and just so the American public understands, if you adjust for population, this would be the equivalent of 5, 6, 7 million people compared to the U.S. size of the U.S. population. So this is quite a large number. But taking that into account, what do the Spanish people think about this?
The Spanish society is actually divided. And according to the polls, I would say roughly 35% of the population is in favor of this regularization, while rather 30% is against. And the others, they don't really have a clear opinion. That might be very surprising for you. But you have to know that in Spain, there is, to a certain extent, a mentality of welcoming migrants, of like compassion, of this suicidal empathy. That is something that is very, very present. I'll give you an example. In Spain, the church, the Catholic Church, is very much supporting this regularization. Actually, some of their organizations initiated the procedure that led to the regularization. So the Spanish Catholic Church is very much supporting this process. And the reasons are like this very abstract, compelling call for compassion. And arguments such as, well, they're here anyway. If we regularize them, they will pay more tax, they will pay taxes, and they will bring benefits to they will contribute to the social system. And well, they might pay taxes, but believe me, they're not going to contribute to the social system, because normally they are, and this is already, we have very clear evidence of that in Europe, irregular migration and even legal migration coming from certain places brings, it's much more costly to the country of destination than it brings benefits. And so sadly, again, I'm sure that you in the US will be very surprised about it, but the Spanish society is divided, and you still have one large third of Spanish voters, at least, who are supporting this crazy measure. And crazy because, again, we don't know who is coming. The conditions of regularization are very, very, very lax, very lousy. Last time we had a regularization in Spain in 2005, at least the migrants had to show that they had a working permit. This time they don't. They simply have to show that they were living there. So it's not only the migrants, illegal migrants that we had in Spain, is that quite a few others came from other EU countries to Spanish cities just to pretend that they were living there in order to get the papers. And so that's why it also has an impact on the European Union, but I'm sure we're going to speak about it. But yes, again, I insist, the Spanish society is divided about this regularization.
Well, we here in the U.S., we had a major amnesty in 1986. About 3 million illegal aliens got American legal residency. And since then, we've seen our illegal alien population explode. Now we have, around 18 million illegal aliens, so 6 times as many people as got an amnesty in the first place in 1986. Do you think that the amnesty will encourage more illegal migration because people will be encouraged by the prospect of another one in the future?
Most likely, yes. Of course, yes. Please bear in mind that in Spain, since the 80s, we had already 7 massive regularizations. This one is the worst. This one is the most political. This one is the less rigorous by far, but we already had 7. And as we can see, that only multiplied the number of illegal migrants in Spain. This number never dropped since Spain started not becoming a land of destination. So, of course, and we already have starting to have some evidence that, for example, in Spain, in the last 3-4 years, we received more migrants than in any other period of the last, of our history, probably. And of course, this is what we call like a call effect, like efecto llamada in Spanish, which means that with a regularization like that, it's the opposite will happen, actually, that you will attract more and more illegal migrants in the hope that they will be sooner or later regularized. Because here it's important that, like the de facto situation, once you are here, once you start working, also knowing that given our legislation and also our European legislation, it's almost impossible to expel, to deport an illegal migrant. But once you make it to Europe, you're almost sure to stay. You have 75% chances to stay as an illegal. And, you have ways then to become legal without a massive regularization. You can have children, for example, you can get married, whether it's a rock marriage or not, at the end, those are things that are rather difficult to evidence. Once you have a child, you have a boulevard of legality in front of you. This is also due to the European legislation in that matter. But at the end of the day, history, the short-term history shows that the 7 regularizations we had in Spain since the 80s never, ever stopped migration. It did actually the opposite. And so this is going to fuel more and more illegal migration, not least because now, as we speak, the current Spanish government is perceived as being, also in their rhetorics, as being very pro-migration. As you notice in America today, the Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sanchez, in order to hide a lot of internal problems, mostly corruption charges. I don't know if you know, but as we speak, the wife of the Prime Minister is indicted, the brother of the Prime Minister is indicted, the former number 2 of the government is now being judged by the Supreme Court. The person who replaced this number 2 when he was kicked out is actually also spent some time in jail. So now Pedro Sanchez is like literally drowning into a tide, into a swamp of corruption. And the best thing he found in order to, to create like this smoke screen is to, be vocal against Donald Trump and to also pretend to be like the international leader of a new left. And the ideology of this new left includes, of course, open borders, migration, everyone is welcome, diversity, multiculturalism. And so this is what is doing now. So this is by far the most ideological regularization we ever had in Spain, and one that is going to bring, for those reasons, a lot more illegal migration in Spain and in other countries of the European Union too.
Now, both in the US and in Europe, mass migration has a huge impact on elections in many different ways. So in this country, in the US, there was an out of control migrant crisis on the southern border for 4 years. And that ultimately, the American public grew so frustrated with that was a huge factor contributing to Donald Trump being voted back into office because the American public wanted their borders and laws respected. But at the same time, the open borders left they want to keep bringing in more immigrants, legal or illegal, because they see them as future voters. Even if they're here illegally, they're hoping that one day there'll be an amnesty and they'll have millions of new voters to vote for left-wing pro-mass migration parties. So as far as the Spanish context goes, what would be the electoral impact of this amnesty in Spain?
Yeah, very good question. And actually, we have to speak about another legislation as well. But let's answer first about the current regularization. This one in the very short term, and very short term means the next general, so national elections that we'll have in Spain normally in July or 2027, so roughly in 1 year. This regularization might not have a big impact on those next elections, because in 1 year, you cannot really give the citizenship to most of the people who apply for the regularization. The regularization is going to give a residence permit, some papers, so to speak, to illegal people. And so it will turn illegal migrants into legal migrants, but not into Spanish citizens. And so it might have an impact in the elections in 6 years' time, for example, but not in the very next one. But this being said, I have to tell you about another legislation adopted by Pedro Sanchez in 2022 called the legislation of democratic memory. And democratic memory means basically to rewrite the Spanish Civil War of 1936 until 1939. And according to this legislation, the grandchildren of the, let's say, the band who, not the band, but basically like the camp who lost this civil war, rather the left-wing people, what we call the Reds. No? You had the blue and the Reds. And so the grandchildren of those who fled the Franco regime after losing the civil war, since 2022 are entitled to ask for Spanish citizenship. And citizenship means that you can vote. You know how many people are entitled to get the Spanish citizenship just because of, on the basis of this very political legislation? 2.5 million, 2.47 million to be precise. And those, and now are being massively, like you have like the Spanish diplomatic service is now totally overwhelmed because they are asked by the government to give as many Spanish passports as they can. And as a result, 2.5 million people who never set a foot in Spain will be able to vote like any other Spanish citizen. And that already next year in 2027. You know what is the third Spanish city today? What is the third Spanish city in terms of population? Buenos Aires, Madrid, Barcelona, and third comes Buenos Aires. And so it means that the Spanish elections, the next one, might be decided by Argentinians who have no relationship with Spain, except being the grandson of somebody who fled 70, 80 years ago. And they will have the same right to elect the next prime minister as a Spaniard that has been there his whole life. And this is a direct interference in the Spanish national elections. How many people vote in Spain? Roughly 38 million people. Well, you can basically add almost 7-8% of voters on the basis of this legislation. And then in 6 years, whenever we have the next election, then this 1 million or maybe 2 million people who got the regularization, so the papers, will be entitled to get the citizenship. They will be on time to get the citizenship, and they will vote as well. For whom are they going to vote? You can guess. And so it means that maybe in 6 years, if you combine both legislations, maybe 10, maximum 15% of the electoral registration list will be totally changed.
But in addition to elections, there's also the aspect of security. So what would be some of the security implication of the Sanchez amnesty? And I'm not just talking about crime and basic threats to public order, but also things like terrorist infiltration, national security threats, because it seems like those who benefit from the amnesty will be able to obtain a travel permit, and then they can go anywhere in Europe within the Schengen Zone, and they can even come to the United States, possibly using the visa waiver program. So what stays in Spain, what happens in Spain does not stay in Spain. So what could possibly go wrong here?
No, that's absolutely correct. Let me maybe explain to the audience what the Schengen Zone is. Basically, 29 European countries, so actually more than the European Union, share a border-free area. So it means that me as a Spaniard, I can travel from Hungary to Sweden or from Hungary to Spain as if you guys were traveling from Minnesota to South Carolina without a border. You don't need to show your passport. And now the persons who obtain the papers, who became legal migrants in Spain, would benefit from that. So legally speaking, they can travel in the rest of Europe. I'm not saying that they can work. They only got a working permit for Spain, but they can travel. And they can travel legally and they can stay illegally. So you can think perfectly about, I don't know, somebody from Pakistan who has been in Spain for 6 months, becomes a legal migrant in Spain, and with these papers travels to France or to Germany and stays there. So of course it has an impact. And even the European Union, and you know how pro-migration it used to be and still is somehow, even the European Union officially complained about the Spanish amnesty because they claim that they should have consulted at European level, because of course it has a European impact on labor, on long-term on residents, but as you said as well, in the very short term, for security. I mean, now in Europe, we know, I mean, this is really irrefutable. No one can say the opposite, that illegal migration increased criminality, thieves, murders, and sexual criminality. In countries like Sweden, for example, it soared. It literally soared. And of course, how can we even be surprised about it? And imagine that Sweden has been importing hundreds of thousands of young men from the Horn of Africa. A bit like in Minnesota, from Somalia. I mean, in Somalia, a lady who smiles is a prostitute. And you bring those young males in their 20s to a country like Sweden, where ladies do much more than smiling. That cannot end well. This is the recipe for a social tragedy. And this is what is happening. Also in France, also in Belgium, also in Italy, also in Spain. Recently means last weekend, you had several murders in Barcelona. And what happened in this case is like it was an illegal Moroccan migrant who just stabbed randomly an Asian, so Chinese origin person, for free. And this Moroccan was an illegal migrant who was supposed to be expelled for a long time already. And cases like that in France, I don't know if you heard about the case of Philippine, for example. Philippine was a beautiful young lady who was just jogging and she was murdered by another Moroccan who should have been expelled a long time ago as well. In France now you have a huge controversy since years already about what they call the OQTF in French, which is the obligation to leave the territory. So the state tells you you are not entitled to stay here, please leave, and they never leave. And the state doesn't enforce its own administrative law. This is what is happening now. And so security is a huge problem. And then the last, but not least, but really a very important aspect of it is terrorism. Quite a few terrorist attacks have been committed by persons who join the European Union as alleged refugees, or even as real refugees. And of course, if you are somebody if you're one of the leaders of the Islamic State, you're very happy that suddenly somebody like Chancellor Merkel says, oh, bring 1.5 million people. I don't even check who they are. I don't even check their criminal record. Nothing. Just bring them on. We will succeed. This is what she said. Wir schaffen das. In German, it means, oh, we will manage. Look what she managed 10 years after. And so again, from a security point of view, what governor can I mean, who has the really stupid, idiotic idea of welcoming millions of migrants without checking who they are before? And this is what happened in the European Union. This is what Pedro Sanchez is doing as we speak with this regularization, and that will increase massively the level of insecurity in Spain. They used to be very low. This is no longer the case.
I mean, speaking from an EU-wide perspective, has the EU been helpful in securing Spain's borders, or has it been hurting it, through its regulations that protect the so-called rights of illegal migrants? Can you talk about, what EU regulations have done as far as border security in Spain?
A lot of harm in Spain and in any other EU country. So again, let me maybe explain the context. The European Union is a place where, like some of the national competences are given to the European Union and then they exercise them. And one of those competences is border management, and asylum. So the large parts of migration policies have been given to the European Union 30 years ago. And what is the conclusion? That it was a disaster, that the EU is absolutely not the right level of decision to deal with migration. And so your question applies to Spain, but it applies to the 26 other members of the European Union, with the exception of 2, Ireland and Denmark, because those 2 small countries are not bound by the EU rules on migration. So they have a national policy. They have this privilege, a privilege that so many European countries would like to have. Because again, after 30 years, the conclusion is, very clear, crystal clear. It has been a very bad idea. And now it's time for member states to take back control, actually. We recently wrote a report that we also presented in Washington called Taking Back Control, 18 measures so that the European member states, the states can recover their sovereignty in the field of migration. What happens with the European Union is that they, first of all, of course, they are not especially reputed for their efficiency. Second, the decision-making process is long and must accommodate sometimes national interests that are totally antagonist. For example, of course, the interest of a country like Italy, which is an external border of the European Union, is not the same as the interest of Germany, which is a country that receives a lot of asylum seekers because it's rich and they have a lot of social benefits, but doesn't have an external border, at least with the South. And so that makes already like the taking common decisions very complicated. And second, in the European Union and in Europe in general, we have two courts that are probably the most important problem today in order for member states to recover this sovereignty. The Court of the European Union, so the European Union Court, so to speak, and also the European Court of Human Rights, which is more or less the equivalent of your Court of San Jose, of the European, of the Organization of American States. And they have extremely, their case law almost systematically protects the migrants and the illegal migrants. This is like this distortion of human rights that systematically, again, takes into consideration and makes prevail the interest of the criminals or the alleged vulnerable people like illegal migrants can be, to the detriment of the state, the detriment of the rest of the society. And so the case law of those two courts is so heavy, and basically it's a tantamount to a straitjacket on national sovereignty. So you have some prime ministers, some governments who are ready to fight in order to better control their borders. And unfortunately, they are almost totally castrated by the case law and the legislation of the European Union. For example, family reunification is a competence of the European Union. Why? I don't know. They don't bring any added value, but they are. This competence is in their hands. And of course, it's extremely generous. As I said before, once you're a legal migrant, not even as a European citizen, but a legal migrant, you're entitled to bring your wife, your kids, or the kids of the wife if you didn't have them together, and sometimes even your parents or your in-laws if you show that they are dependent on you. And you can falsify those things. Of course, you can lie very easily. You can find a lady in Pakistan and say, oh, let's marry, and you can bring your 3 kids with you. And then 3 years later, we will divorce in Barcelona or in Madrid or in Paris. And so at the end, the European Union, there is such a fiasco what they did on migration that the solution now is not to wait for a new legislation of the European Union that might be more strict, like the new migration pact. No, the solution is to take back control again, is to give back, that Brussels gives back this competence to the national member states, at least when it comes to border management. I could give you some very ludicrous examples of recent case law of the European Court of Justice, just for you to have an idea. One of them is that since 2024, Hungary, the country where I am established, at least the former government, because I know that the government changed a couple of weeks ago, was sentenced to a fine of 1 million euro per day for infringing the European laws on migration. One law that basically, what Hungary wanted to do is to just force the asylum seekers to request asylum from a third country. Because once you are in the EU, it's almost impossible to be expelled, to be deported. And the European Court of Justice sentenced Hungary to the the harshest penalty we have ever seen in the European Union, which is €1 million per day. And you know, during the proceedings, the European Commission, who was the plaintiff in this story, requested a fine of €16,000 per day. €16,000, which is not much. And the court multiplied it by 63 in order to make it 1 million. That was a symbolic ideological sanction that shows, you know, that the software of the European Union is pro-migration. The European Union is based on the utopia of no borders. The European values they are defending have nothing to do with the European civilization. It's quite the opposite. The European Union seems to be today like a waiting room for globalism. And so they don't care about the European roots, about European identity, not at all. And at the end, what they want indeed is a European Union that is diluted into multiculturalism. And they're pushing for that. The court is pushing for that. When I was working in the European Commission and I was dealing with migration, I remember people telling us, oh, integration is a two-way street. So it's for the migrant to make some offers, but it's all efforts, but it's also for us Europeans to get closer to the migrants. Really? Are we sure about it? You know, when I was a child, I heard that in Rome, do like Romans do. I never heard that it was supposed, that it was Rome supposed to be, to do like the barbarian state, the foreigner state. And so this is, again, it's not only that the European Union is, let's say, unable to deal with those challenges from a legal and political point of view, it's also that ideologically they are totally rotten. I insist, totally rotten. And I extend that to the European Court of Human Rights. I could give you thousands of examples of ludicrous case law, but I'm afraid that we don't have time for that.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. We will, of course, we have read the report that you referenced, and we will be linking to it below the video, as well as to our own work on illegal immigration. Well, that's all the questions we have time for today. Mr. Ballester, thank you so much for talking to us and sharing your insights with us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And to our viewers, thank you very much for watching and listening.
If you want to learn more, you can visit us at www.fairus.org.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation.